2 hours ago, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission issued a threat that legal experts are calling unconstitutional, lawmakers are calling totalitarian, and free speech advocates are calling outrageous. FCC Chair Brendan Carr warned American broadcasters that they could lose their licenses if they do not, quote, correct course on their coverage of the war in Iran. Not over obscenity, not over false emergency alerts, over news reporting the White House does not like. The message was unmistakable. Cover the war the way Trump wants, or the government will shut you down. Before we break down exactly what happened and why this might be the most dangerous government attack on press freedom in modern American history, if you appreciate this kind of analysis, hit that subscribe button and like this video so you never miss a story like this. Here is what Brendan Carr actually said. On Saturday morning, he posted on X, formerly Twitter, quote, broadcasters that are running hoaxes and news distortions, also known as the fake news, have a chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up. The law is clear. Broadcasters must operate in the public interest, and they will lose their licenses if they do not. He linked directly to a Truth Social post from President Donald Trump attacking the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and what Trump called other low-life papers and media for their coverage of Iranian strikes on American aircraft in Saudi Arabia. Trump's complaint was specific. 5 U.S. Air Force refueling tankers were hit at Prince Sultan Air Base. Both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reported the strikes. Both noted that the aircraft were damaged but not destroyed and were being repaired. Trump confirmed those facts in his own post. 4 of the 5 had virtually no damage, he wrote. None were destroyed or close to that. But Trump called the headlines intentionally misleading and accused the media of wanting the United States to lose the war. Carr, the nation's chief broadcast regulator, amplified that complaint and turned it into a direct threat. News coverage the president dislikes could cost broadcasters their licenses. The reaction was immediate and devastating to Carr's credibility. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren wrote, Constitutional Law 101. It is illegal for the government to censor free speech it just does not like about Trump's Iran war. This threat is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy went further. We are not on the verge of a totalitarian takeover, he wrote. We are in the middle of it. This is the federal government telling news stations to provide favorable coverage of the war or their licenses will be pulled. California Governor Gavin Newsom called it flagrantly unconstitutional. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a free speech advocacy group, called Carr's warning outrageous. When the government demands the press become a state mouthpiece under the threat of punishment, something has gone very wrong. But here is what makes this moment even more remarkable. The criticism did not come only from Democrats. Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, a Trump ally, pushed back hard. I am not in favor of the heavy hand of government no matter who is wielding it, Johnson said on Fox News Sunday. So no, I would rather the federal government stay out of the private sector as much as possible. Even some conservatives, including Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, said Carr went too far. That is how extreme this threat is. When Republican senators are publicly breaking with a Trump appointee over press freedom, you know the line has been crossed. Now let's talk about what Brendan Carr can actually do. The answer is almost nothing. And that makes this threat even more cynical. The FCC does not regulate national networks like ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or Fox News directly. It regulates local broadcast stations. Those stations renew their licenses every 8 years. The next round of renewals does not even begin until late 2028. Carr responded to that criticism by saying the Communications Act allows the FCC to call in licenses for early renewal. That is technically true, but doing so would trigger a hearing process with multiple opportunities for stations to challenge the government. Any attempt to revoke a license over news content would face years of litigation and an almost certain First Amendment challenge that the FCC would lose. Andrew J. Schwartzman, a public interest communications attorney, told CNN that Carr's threats are hollow. The FCC has not denied a license renewal in decades. Any government action against a licensee would cause a protracted legal battle, especially given Trump's well-documented retributive streak. A station would cite the president's public attacks and mount a First Amendment case that legal experts say would be bulletproof. But here is the problem. The threat itself is the point. Carr is not trying to win in court. He is trying to intimidate news organizations into self-censorship. Media advocacy groups have said Carr is pressuring companies into submission, which would achieve what Trump wants without explicit government action. And it has worked before. In February, ABC brought back Jimmy Kimmel Live after pausing the show when Carr suggested local stations risk their licenses over Kimmel's comments linking Charlie Kirk's alleged killer to Trump's MAGA movement. Nexstar Media Group and Sinclair both temporarily pulled the show. They caved to pressure from a government regulator who threatened their licenses over late-night comedy. Now Carr is applying the same pressure to war coverage. This is not the first time the Trump administration has gone after media companies. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth singled out CNN during a press briefing on Friday, saying the sooner David Ellison takes over that network, the better. Ellison's Paramount is seeking to acquire CNN's parent company, Warner Bros. Discovery. Hegseth was not commenting on a business deal. He was rooting for an ownership change that might produce friendlier coverage. Trump himself has taken credit for reshaping the American media landscape through intimidation, regulatory leverage, and policy pressure. Now facing a war with dismal polling and a muddled message, the administration is turning its fire on reporters and threatening news outlets that do not fall in line. Here is why this is so dangerous. Wartime is exactly when press freedom matters most. Governments have an incentive to control the narrative, suppress bad news, and present optimistic assessments that may not reflect reality. A free press is the only check on that power. When the FCC chairman threatens broadcasters over coverage the government does not like, he is not protecting the public interest. He is protecting the government's interest in controlling the message. The specific complaint Trump and Carr made reveals how absurd this is. 5 tankers were hit. That is a fact. They were damaged. That is a fact. They are being repaired. That is a fact. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal reported those facts accurately. Trump's complaint was not that they lied. His complaint was that the headlines made the strikes sound worse than he wanted them to sound. That is not fake news. That is a president who wants the press to downplay bad news during a war he started. Iranian missiles hit American aircraft on foreign soil. That is significant news. Iran has the capability and willingness to strike American assets in the region. Trump wants headlines that say no big deal. Journalists reported the strikes accurately. Those are not the same story. And the government does not get to dictate which version the press tells. Carr's invocation of the public interest standard is equally dishonest. The FCC's own website says the First Amendment and the Communications Act expressly prohibit the Commission from censoring broadcast matter. Carr knows this. He said so himself in 2019. Should the government censor speech it does not like, he asked. Of course not. That was Brendan Carr 5 years ago. Today's Brendan Carr threatens news outlets because the president does not like their reporting. Trump endorsed Carr's threat on Sunday. He is thrilled Carr is looking at the licenses of highly unpatriotic news organizations. The president is openly supporting government retaliation against the press. That is authoritarian behavior happening in the United States in 2026. FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez posted that Carr's threats violate the First Amendment. Broadcasters should continue covering the news fiercely and independently. She acknowledged that the threat itself is the point. The pressure alone can shape corporate decisions. And that is the insidious part. Carr does not need to win in court. He just needs news executives to think twice before running stories the White House will not like. He needs stations to calculate whether it is safer to soften the tone and keep the FCC happy. If that happens, Carr wins. The First Amendment stays intact on paper. But in practice, the government has chilled the press into submission. This is also happening while Trump pressures allies to join a war they opposed, while oil prices spike above $100, while the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. This is exactly when the country needs aggressive independent journalism, and this is exactly when the government is threatening to shut it down. 2 hours ago, the FCC chairman told broadcasters to correct course or lose their licenses. 2 hours later, senators from both parties are calling it unconstitutional and totalitarian. Legal experts are calling it hollow but dangerous, and journalists are being told that covering a war honestly could cost their employers everything. Mark this moment. Because this is what happens when a government at war decides the press is the enemy. When accurate reporting becomes fake news. When holding power accountable becomes unpatriotic. You do not get state-run media through legislation. You get it through intimidation. And right now, the chairman of the FCC is doing exactly that. If this does not alarm you, nothing will.